Writing variant equals document ID equals 58321. Where is she? Ethan Callahan asked, and for the first time in 20 years, no one in the mansion dared answer him. The bedroom door stood open at the end of the quiet hallway. A thin ribbon of morning light stretched across the polished floor, touching a silver tray, a folded towel, and a glass of water that had not been finished. Everything looked normal. Everything except Maya Bennett was gone. Ethan stood completely still. At 43, he had built his reputation on never reacting before he understood the situation. His dark brown hair was swept neatly back, silver naturally threading through roughly 30% of it, the short fade at his temples clean beneath the warm hallway lights. His short boxed beard, also touched with natural silver, framed a square jaw and high cheekbones. He wore a tailored black suit over a black shirt left open at the collar, exposing part of the black and gray tattoo work covering his upper chest and disappearing beneath the collar line. His brown eyes moved slowly across the room. No panic, no shouting, only calculation. Maya's phone lay near the nightstand. Her small handbag was still there. Her shoes were beside the closet. She had not packed for a trip. She had not chosen to leave. Ethan walked inside. The room carried the faint scent of fresh linen and the soft warmth of a place that had been occupied only minutes earlier. He noticed something near the door. A tiny thread of dark fabric caught against the metal handle. He reached down and touched it between two fingers. His expression did not change, but something inside him tightened. Maya had worked in his household for nearly a year. She was quiet without being timid, graceful without demanding attention, and somehow capable of making a room feel calmer simply by being in it. She never asked for special treatment. She never complained about the long hours. She simply did her work and carried herself with a dignity Ethan had noticed long before he admitted it to himself. That morning, she had been scheduled to prepare breakfast at 7. At 6:42, one of the household cameras had gone offline for exactly 11 seconds. Ethan had not known that yet. He only knew that Maya was missing. He stepped toward the window. It was closed from the inside. He turned toward the security panel beside the hallway. Green lights blinked in perfect rhythm. Too perfect. His eyes narrowed. "Pull every camera from the last 2 hours," he said calmly. His head of security, Marcus Reed, immediately reached for his phone. Already doing it. Ethan looked back at the empty room. There was something unsettling about the silence. Not because the mansion was quiet. It was always quiet. It was because Maya's absence seemed to occupy more space than her presence ever had. On the desk sat a folded piece of paper. Ethan picked it up. There were only 3 words written in Maya's neat handwriting. "I should have told you." His eyes remained fixed on the sentence. Then his phone rang. Marcus answered first, listened for several seconds, and slowly lowered the phone. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "there's a problem with the footage." Ethan looked at him. "What kind?" Marcus swallowed. 11 seconds are missing." The room went silent. Ethan looked once more at Maya's empty doorway. Then, with the same calm voice, writing variant equals document ID equals 74126. 6 hours earlier, Maya Bennett had no idea that the quiet morning inside the Callahan mansion would become the last ordinary morning she remembered. At 6:15, she stood in the kitchen beneath the soft amber lights, carefully arranging fresh fruit on a white ceramic plate. Outside, the first light of morning rested over the city, turning the tall windows pale gold. The mansion was unusually still. Ethan Callahan had already left for an early meeting, and the household staff moved quietly through their routines. Maya had learned the rhythm of the place during her 11 months there. She knew which doors opened with a soft click, which floorboards creaked, and which hallway received sunlight first. She also knew that Ethan noticed details most people missed. That was why she had hesitated before mentioning the unfamiliar sedan she had seen parked across the street 3 mornings in a row. She had noticed it again that morning. A dark gray sedan, parked half a block away, engine running. Maya stood near the kitchen window, holding a clean glass in one hand, watching it through the reflection. She could not see the driver clearly. The vehicle remained there for perhaps 2 minutes, then slowly disappeared around the corner. Maya lowered the glass. She told herself it was probably nothing. A delivery driver, a neighbor, someone waiting for a ride. There was no reason to create worry where none existed. Still, the feeling stayed with her. She finished preparing breakfast and carried the tray toward the private dining room. Ethan was not there. His chair remained empty at the head of the table. On the polished surface sat a folded newspaper, a black leather notebook, and the watch he sometimes removed when he wanted a moment away from the world. Maya placed the tray down carefully. As she turned to leave, she noticed Ethan entering through the far doorway. He had returned unexpectedly. His dark brown hair was swept back, silver naturally visible through the rich brown strands. His black suit was perfectly fitted, and his black shirt remained open at the collar, revealing a portion of the fixed black and gray tattoos across his upper chest. His expression was calm, controlled, almost unreadable. "You are early," Maya said softly. Ethan glanced at the clock. "So are you." There was the faintest trace of warmth in his voice. Maya gave him a small smile. "Breakfast is ready." Ethan looked at the table, then back at her. "You did not have to wait." "I know." She paused. For a moment, she considered telling him about the sedan. Ethan noticed the hesitation immediately. Something happened? Maya looked toward the windows. "There was a car outside earlier. I have seen it a few times this week." Ethan's eyes sharpened, but his voice remained even. "Did you see who was inside?" "No," she lowered her gaze. "It may be nothing." Ethan studied her for another second. "If you notice it again, tell security." Maya nodded. "I will." Neither of them knew how important those 4 words would become. Ethan returned to his meeting less than 30 minutes later. Maya went back to her work. The morning continued as if nothing had changed. At 7:28, she carried clean linens toward the east wing. At 7:31, a security camera near the service entrance flickered once. At 7:32, Maya heard the soft sound of a vehicle stopping outside. She paused. Her fingers tightened around the folded linens. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her. She turned. No one was there. The mansion suddenly felt different. Not dangerous. Not yet. Just unfamiliar. Maya slowly placed the linens on a nearby table and reached for her phone. Before she could unlock it, the screen went dark. The battery had been full a few minutes earlier. She looked toward. The investigation inside Blackwood Estate continued quietly, but Adrian Whitmore could no longer convince himself that the strange events beneath his mansion were an isolated incident. The following morning, he entered his private office before sunrise, while the estate was still wrapped in silence. Pale light rested across the tall windows, and the polished surface of his desk reflected the untouched files he had arranged the night before. Adrian stood there for several seconds, reading the same notes again, but his thoughts kept returning to Olivia Carter. She had worked inside his home for years, moving through the halls with patience and dignity, yet somehow he had never stopped to ask what she had seen, what she had endured, or why certain parts of the estate seemed to make her uncomfortable. Now, every unanswered question felt heavier. Olivia had told him that she had noticed unusual behavior long before he discovered the basement. She had noticed employees changing their routines. She had noticed certain doors being used at unusual hours. She had noticed conversations that stopped whenever someone entered the room. None of those details seemed important when considered separately. Together, they formed a pattern. Adrian slowly opened a folder containing household records. Several entries appeared incomplete. Dates did not always match. Certain maintenance requests had been approved without the usual signatures. The details were small, almost ordinary, but Adrian had spent too many years reading between the lines to dismiss them. Someone had been making decisions inside his estate without expecting him to notice. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Olivia stood at the doorway. She wore the same simple work clothes she had worn the previous day, her deep ebony brown skin illuminated by the muted morning light, her dark brown eyes calm beneath natural makeup. She did not enter until Adrian nodded. "I found something," he said. Olivia approached the desk carefully. She looked at the papers, but did not reach for them. "What did you find?" she asked. Adrian showed her a series of maintenance records connected to the lower level. Olivia studied them for several moments. Then her expression changed slightly. "These dates," she said. "They are wrong." Adrian looked at her. "How do you know?" Olivia pointed to one entry. "Because I was assigned to clean that hallway that week. The door was already sealed. Nobody was supposed to use that area." Her voice remained steady, but Adrian could hear the certainty behind every word. "Who gave the order?" he asked. Olivia paused. "I never saw the person who gave it, but I remember who delivered the message." Adrian waited. Olivia looked toward the window before answering. Mr. Hale. The name settled between them. Adrian's expression became still. Victor Hale had been part of his organization for years, trusted with responsibilities most people could not handle. He was experienced, disciplined, and loyal by reputation. But reputation was no longer enough. Adrian closed the folder. Why did you never tell me? Olivia looked directly at him. Because I did not know what was true. I only knew something felt wrong. Her answer stayed with him. She had not acted from fear or ambition. She had waited until she had something real to say. Adrian finally understood that Olivia's greatest strength was not what she knew. It was how carefully she chose to use that knowledge. He stood and walked toward the office door. Then we keep looking, he said. And this time, nobody decides what you are allowed to see. Olivia nodded quietly. Outside the office, the mansion remained peaceful. But inside its walls, the truth was beginning to take shape. The next morning, Blackwood Estate looked exactly as it always had, but Adrian Whitmore no longer saw it the same way. The polished floors, quiet hallways, and carefully arranged rooms still reflected wealth and control, yet beneath that perfection was a question he could not ignore. Who had been helping Victor Hale make decisions without Adrian knowing? Adrian spent the early hours reviewing records in his private office, comparing maintenance requests, staff schedules, and old household reports. The more he examined, the clearer the pattern became. Certain decisions had been made during periods when Adrian was away. Some records had been altered after approval. Others carried names of employees who claimed they had never seen the documents. None of it proved everything, but together, the details were too consistent to dismiss. Adrian leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. For years, he had believed information was the foundation of power. If he knew everything, he could control everything. Now he was learning that information meant very little when people were too afraid to speak. A quiet knock came at the door. Olivia Carter entered carrying a tray of fresh coffee. She placed it on the side table and noticed the papers spread across the desk. You found more, she said. Adrian looked at her. Enough to know this did not happen by accident. Olivia remained silent for a moment. Then she pointed toward one of the records. That signature does not belong to Mrs. Bennett. Adrian's eyes narrowed. How do you know? Because she signs the payroll documents every Friday. I have seen her signature for years. Adrian studied the page again. It was a small observation, but it mattered. Olivia had not guessed. She had remembered. She had paid attention to the ordinary details that powerful people often overlooked. There is something else, she added. Adrian waited. Victor Hale used to visit the lower hallway before the basement was sealed, usually late in the evening. He always asked the cleaning staff to leave that area. Adrian's expression became still. Why did you never tell me? Olivia lowered her eyes briefly. Because I thought it was part of his responsibilities. And because nobody asked. The word struck Adrian harder than any accusation could have. Nobody asked. That was the truth beneath everything. People had seen things. They had noticed changes. But they had learned to remain silent because silence was easier than becoming a problem. Adrian stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the estate grounds were bright beneath the morning sun. A gardener worked near the stone path, while two employees carried supplies toward the kitchen. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But Adrian knew it had. I am going to speak with Victor, he said. Olivia looked at him carefully. Do not let anger decide what you do. Adrian turned toward her. For a second, the powerful man disappeared behind the human being she had learned to recognize. You think I am angry? I think you are disappointed, Olivia answered. There is a difference. Adrian said nothing. She was right. His disappointment was not only directed at Victor. It was directed at himself. He had spent years believing his control protected everyone inside the estate. Yet his own assumptions had created a place where people learned not to speak. Before leaving the office, Adrian looked once more at the documents. Then he closed the folder. The truth was no longer hiding in the basement. It was standing in front of him, waiting for him to decide what kind of man he would be when he finally faced it. : writing variant equals document ID equals 74163. Adrian Whitmore did not move for several seconds after Victor's words. The library seemed to hold its breath around him. The old clock above the fireplace continued ticking, steady and indifferent, while the meaning of those records settled into the room. My family's records? Adrian asked. Victor nodded slowly. They were kept long before you took control of the estate. Olivia remained near the doorway, watching Adrian carefully. She could see the change in his expression. This was no longer about missing signatures or unusual maintenance requests. This was personal. Adrian walked to the nearest window and looked across the grounds he had known since childhood. Blackwood Estate had belonged to his family for generations. He remembered summer afternoons beneath the oak trees, formal dinners in the dining room, and his grandfather telling him that every room carried a story. He had never imagined that some of those stories had been deliberately hidden. "How far back do the records go?" Adrian asked. Victor answered quietly. "Nearly 30 years. Adrian turned around. "And why were they hidden from me?" Victor hesitated. "Because your father ordered it." The words landed softly, but their weight was enormous. Adrian's father had been gone for 8 years. For most of Adrian's adult life, he had remembered the man as strict but principled, someone who valued reputation above almost everything. Yet now, a different possibility stood before him. Maybe his father had been protecting the family name. Maybe he had been protecting someone else. Or maybe he had been protecting a secret that was never meant to survive him. Olivia stepped closer. "Mr. Whitmore," she said gently, "there is something I remembered." Adrian looked at her. "What is it?" "When I first started working here, your father was still alive. He once asked me to clean the old study." She paused. There was a woman there. Victor's eyes immediately shifted toward her. Adrian noticed. "What woman?" Olivia searched her memory. "I do not know her name. She was older, maybe in her 60s. She seemed upset, but she was not afraid. Your father spoke with her for almost an hour. Before she left, he gave her an envelope." Adrian's mind raced. "Did you see what was inside?" Olivia shook her head. "No, but I remember one thing she said." The library became silent again. "She told your father that one day, you would deserve to know the truth." Adrian stared at Olivia. Victor lowered his gaze. That reaction told Adrian more than any explanation could have. "You know who she was," Adrian said. Victor remained silent. Adrian's voice stayed calm. "Victor." Finally, Victor exhaled. "Her name was Eleanor Brooks." Adrian frowned. The name meant nothing to him. "Who was she?" Victor looked toward the old bookshelves. "She worked for your family many years ago." Olivia's expression changed. "A housekeeper?" Victor nodded. "Yes." Adrian felt something shift inside him. For decades, his family had treated the household staff as people who served quietly and disappeared into the background. Yet the first person to point toward the truth had been someone who had once stood in those same halls. Adrian looked at Olivia, then at Victor. "Find the records connected to Eleanor Brooks," he said. "Every document, every date, every name." Victor nodded. Olivia remained still, her eyes fixed on Adrian. For the first time, she saw something different in him. He was not searching for a way to protect his family's reputation. He was searching for the truth, even if that truth changed everything he believed about the people who came before him. Outside, evening settled over Blackwood Estate, and the windows reflected the warm lights of the library. Somewhere in the hidden history of the house was an answer waiting to be found. An ad. By noon, Adrian Whitmore had already made arrangements to leave Blackwood Estate. But before he could reach the front entrance, Olivia came running from the library with the old ledger pressed against her chest. Her usually calm expression had changed. "Mr. Whitmore, I found something else." Adrian stopped immediately. Victor followed behind her, carrying the wooden box. "What did you find?" Adrian asked. Olivia opened the ledger to a page near the back. A narrow column of numbers had been written beside several names, and one name appeared more than once. Victor leaned closer. "That account number," he said quietly. "It matches the one from the maintenance records." Adrian felt the pieces moving closer together. "Whose name is beside it?" Olivia pointed to the faded writing. "Margaret Ellis." Victor's face became unreadable. Adrian searched his memory. The name meant nothing to him. Who is Margaret Ellis? Victor hesitated before answering. "Your father's former personal assistant." Adrian looked at the ledger again. "Where is she now?" "I do not know," Victor said. "But Eleanor Brooks might." The three of them stood in silence. Adrian closed the ledger and looked toward Olivia. "We find Eleanor first." An hour later, Adrian sat in the back seat of his car while Olivia rode beside him. Victor followed in another vehicle. The drive took them away from the polished neighborhoods surrounding Blackwood Estate and toward an older part of the city, where brick apartment buildings stood beside small family-owned stores. Adrian had not visited that part of town in years. Olivia looked through the window quietly. "My grandmother used to live near here," she said. Adrian glanced at her. "You grew up nearby?" "About 15 minutes from here. My family never had much, but we always had enough to keep going." Adrian nodded. He found himself thinking about how different their childhoods had been. He had inherited rooms filled with history. Olivia had inherited the responsibility of making every dollar count. Yet now she was the one helping him understand his own family. They stopped outside a modest brick building with a narrow front entrance. Victor checked the address. "This is it." Adrian looked at the worn brass numbers beside the door. "Eleanor Brooks." Olivia quietly corrected him. "Her old address." They climbed 2 flights of stairs and found an elderly neighbor sitting near an open window. When Adrian showed her a photograph of Eleanor, the woman's eyes softened with recognition. "Eleanor moved away years ago," she said. "But she left something with me." Adrian exchanged a glance with Olivia. The neighbor disappeared into her apartment and returned with a small envelope. It was sealed, yellowed, and addressed simply to Adrian Whitmore. His name was written in handwriting he had never seen before, yet the sight of it made his chest tighten. "She told me to give it to you if you ever came asking questions," the woman said. Adrian accepted the envelope carefully. He did not open it immediately. For years, he had believed his family's silence was designed to protect him. Now he understood that perhaps it had been designed to delay him. Olivia stood beside him as he broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. The first sentence was enough to make Adrian stop breathing for a moment. "If you are reading this, then your father is gone, and the truth can no longer be kept from you." Adrian looked at Olivia. She said nothing. He returned his eyes to the letter. The words ahead promised answers about Eleanor, Margaret Ellis, the missing records, and a decision his father had made decades earlier. But before Adrian could continue, he noticed one final line written beneath the signature. "Do not trust the person who tells you this secret is over." The hallway suddenly felt very quiet. Adrian folded the letter carefully and looked toward Victor. For the first time, even Victor seemed to understand that the past had not simply been waiting to be discovered. It had been waiting for the right person to finally listen. Adrian Whitmore read Eleanor Brooks's letter twice before he finally looked up. The small hallway seemed too narrow for the weight of what he had just learned. Olivia stood beside him, watching his expression carefully, while Victor remained a few steps away, unusually silent. "She knew," Adrian said quietly. "She knew my father was hiding something." Olivia nodded. "And she wanted you to find out when you were ready." Adrian looked down at the letter again. Eleanor explained that 30 years earlier, she had discovered irregular transfers from a family account connected to Blackwood Estate. The money had not been stolen in the usual sense. It had been redirected through several accounts, then quietly returned under different names. The purpose had been to protect employees whose wages had been withheld by a former family manager. Eleanor had found proof, but she had also discovered something more troubling. Margaret Ellis had known about the arrangement. She had helped organize the records because Adrian's father had wanted to correct the problem without exposing the families involved to public embarrassment. "So my father was not hiding stolen money," Adrian said. "He was hiding the fact that he had been fixing something someone else had done." Victor finally spoke. "That is what he told me." Adrian looked at him. "But that still does not explain the recent records." Victor shook his head. "No, it does not." Olivia took the letter gently from Adrian and pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. "Read this." Adrian followed the words. Eleanor had written that after she left Blackwood Estate, she continued receiving occasional letters from Margaret Ellis. The last letter had arrived only 2 years earlier. It mentioned that someone had begun asking questions about the old accounts again. Someone who knew enough about the hidden records to recreate the same financial trail. Adrian's expression hardened. 2 years ago. Olivia nodded. That was when Victor said the unusual maintenance requests began. Victor looked troubled. "I did not connect them." Adrian folded the letter carefully. "Then someone has been searching for the same information we are searching for." He turned toward the elderly neighbor. "Do you know where Eleanor lives now?" The woman shook her head. "She moved to Ohio years ago, but she used to call someone named Margaret." Adrian exchanged a glance with Olivia. "Margaret Ellis." The neighbor nodded. That was the name. For the first time that day, Adrian allowed himself a quiet breath of relief. They had a direction. Before they left, Olivia noticed a small notation written on the back of the envelope. A telephone number. She showed it to Adrian. This might still work. Adrian took out his phone and entered the number. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Hello. Adrian paused. Is this Margaret Ellis? Silence followed. Then the woman asked, Who is calling? Adrian introduced himself. The silence returned, longer this time. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was calm but cautious. I wondered when you would come looking. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. You knew my father. Yes, she answered. And I knew Eleanor. Olivia listened closely. Margaret continued. Your father asked me to protect something until you were old enough to understand it. Adrian's voice softened. What was it? Margaret hesitated. Not money. Not documents. A promise. Adrian looked at Olivia. Margaret continued. Your father promised that no employee at Blackwood Estate would ever again be treated as invisible. The words settled quietly over them. Adrian remembered every hallway, every staff member, every moment when he had walked past someone without asking their name. He looked at Olivia and understood why she had become the person who helped him uncover the truth. The secret his father had protected was not about wealth. It was about dignity. And now Adrian had to decide whether he would honor that promise or allow the old habits of power to continue shaping the future of Blackwood Estate.